If you want to experience joy in your life, then that means you have to pursue significance. You have to pursue your purpose, live your purpose, and you have to pursue meaning. That's where joy comes from. It doesn't come from, an experience that you dreamt about your whole life. No, it comes from pursuing significance. And what's interesting is the only thing that can produce significance in your life is knowing Jesus. None of these other ideologies, postmodernism, philosophies, even other religions, they don't produce unmitigated joy in the life of people. Because the Christmas story is about God, the objective reality outside of us, coming to people in order for them to be redeemed, the greatest act of love. And in doing so, what he says by coming to you is he elevates the value of you as an individual. You may not feel valuable yourself. Sometimes your mistakes and your flaws and your failures, they overwhelm you. Sometimes that negative tape, just keeps playing in your head, how you don't measure up, how you've made too many mistakes. You'll never amount to anything. Well, if you accept and mold your life around the fact that God emptied himself and came to earth as Jesus, it's really hard to believe you don't have value anymore. It's really difficult. Because that truth in and of itself, it's objective, it exists in history outside of yourself, it's verifiable, shows and proves that to believe you're not valuable is irrational. It really is, because of what God had done. Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. Today, Christmas, how the beloved holiday in Western civilization is becoming the source of cultural consternation. Like never before, what we celebrate is being questioned, redefined, reinterpreted to the point, if you want to enjoy the season, the lights, the traditional aspects of Christmas, you are now considered an irrational religious nut who believes in fairy tales. The effort is on to take Jesus out of Christmas. Why does there seem to be such a significant movement challenging the truthfulness of Christmas? Well, I am your salty pastor, and our purpose of this podcast is to coach you up in your faith. And that means giving you the skills to think for yourself. I want you to know what you believe and why you believe it. They are your convictions. They're not mine or anybody else's. They are yours and yours alone. People who think for themselves, who learn how to do that, they need to know, they want to know, they are driven to know that if what they believe is real, has it been tested? Has it been vetted? Is it verifiable? Is it reasonable? Is it rational? This is not a refutation of biblical faith. This is the foundation of biblical faith. We're not here to tell you what to believe. We're here to help you discover what you believe for yourself. Why? So that you know that you're building your life on a rock-solid foundation of truth. As we say, fluff is not enough. Now, this Christmas story has lots of elements to it, as we discussed on Tuesday. We can't go into all of them, but we did talk about the Magi, and we talked about how it is one of the more controversial because so many people criticize it as impossible that a star would move around and that wise men could come and follow it. It's considered fanciful. It's myth. It's simply written for the sole purpose of indulging, the mythology around Jesus. And so if you really want to dig into the rational and the scientific aspects of how truthful this really is and how plausible it really is, listen to Tuesday's episode. What I'd like to do right now, though, is show how, once again, pointed out on Tuesday, is that the scribes and the Pharisees, Matthew show, knew exactly where the Messiah was to be born. And yet they missed it. Whereas Magi from the East, outside of their culture and society, saw the signs plain as day, and they met Jesus. Now, what's really interesting is that sometimes our ideologies, and we see this is why they are so important, they are a frame of reference by which you interpret what's going on around you, can lock you into tunnel vision or myopia. When facts are right there in front of your face, you refuse to consider them. You refuse to take in new information and adjust your belief system. That's why it's important to test your beliefs. That's why it's important to challenge your assumptions. This is how you grow. There's a philosopher out there, a mathematician, and his name is Bayes, and it's called Bayes' theorem. And he talks about, there's a mathematical theorem that says that pre-probabilities, I know this sounds a little abstract, but pre-probabilities determine the higher likelihood of the next probability in a particular discipline. Now, mathematically, mathematicians will get into this, and my son Zach, he would love it. But predominantly, the whole point of this is that your past areas of success where you believed something and then you acted on that belief and it was successful has a tendency to influence your next set of beliefs to some level. However, when you are confronted with a fact that is completely contrary to that belief, you tend to minimize it or discount it because it's very hard to change beliefs. Now, I remember a professor back in I believe it's my undergrad, I remember him talking about, he says, what wise people do, people who think for themselves, is that they're very open to new ideas. They will explore new ideas. They will engage with them. They'll ask questions about them. So they're very open to new ideas, but they're extremely slow to change their beliefs. I thought that's really interesting. So they're very open to new things, but they don't jump on them. They don't adopt them quickly. I mean, they really vet them over time before they incorporate them into their core beliefs. That's what I want the Salt Steep Pastor to help you do, is I want you to first and foremost clarify your beliefs. Know that the beliefs that you have been vetted and have been considered. They've been tested and challenged, and they've come up winning every single time for thousands of years. And that's why you can depend on them. That's why you can believe in them. That's why you can build your life on them. And then it allows you to be a great explorer, a great adventurer, open to new ideas and new thoughts, new concepts, but very, very slow to change your beliefs. That's how you become a confident person. That's where courage to navigate this life comes from. It comes from core values that are built on rock solid truth. So in this whole series of ideologies, the only way that these ideologies that I've been talking about, postmodernism, deconstructionism, we're going to talk about all the other ones that are on the list starting in January, is the only way that these ideologies can ever take root in a society or a culture is if you actually get rid of Jesus. Not just the ideas of Jesus, not just the teachings of Jesus, but just get rid of Jesus. Because what's so fascinating is biblical Christianity in the New Testament is simply knowing Jesus. So it's not, hey, you got to follow this religious dress. You got to listen to this religious music or follow this religious diet or these religious ceremonies to be a Christian. No, being a Christian simply means, do you know Jesus? And are you seeking him? All right. Is he the author and perfecter of your faith? Is he your faith? And so if you get rid of Jesus, if you undermine Jesus, discredit Jesus, or just eliminate him, and one of the best ways to do that is to challenge the celebrations around him. And two of the biggest celebrations that Christians have celebrated for 2,000 years are his birth, which we call Christmas, and his resurrection, which we call Easter. One of the things that's really fascinating is, according to Bayes' theorem, is that it's easy for people to be driven more by the ideology than their truth. But if you don't have any objective truth on which to build your beliefs, i.e. Jesus, then you are robbing yourself of the capacity to experience real joy. And I want to say this because it's a very important principle. You really need to get it. If you want to experience joy in your life, then that means you have to pursue significance. You have to pursue your purpose, live your purpose, and you have to pursue meaning. That's where joy comes from. It doesn't come from, an experience that you've dreamt about your whole life. No, it comes from pursuing significance. And what's interesting is the only thing that can produce significance in your life is knowing Jesus. None of these other ideologies, postmodernism, philosophies, even other religions, they don't produce unmitigated joy in the life of people. You look and you talk to people, for instance, in the Islamic faith. The whole goal is not to pursue and experience joy by knowing a person. It's to live by a very strict political, geopolitical, economic code in order to not be cursed, right, or offend Allah. And so that's really the essence of it. And that's why you must strictly follow the 6 pillars of the faith. Now, one of the things that I find so interesting is that in Christianity, the more you know Jesus, the absolute objective truth, the more free and the more joyous your life becomes. And moral relativism, deconstructionism, postmodernism can never produce joy like that. Because the Christmas story is about God, the objective reality outside of us, coming to people in order for them to be redeemed, the greatest act of love. And in doing so, what he says by coming to you is he elevates the value of you as an individual. You may not feel valuable yourself. Sometimes your mistakes and your flaws and your failures, they overwhelm you. Sometimes that negative tape, just keeps playing in your head, how you don't measure up, how you've made too many mistakes. You'll never amount to anything. Well, if you accept and mold your life around the fact that God emptied himself and came to earth as Jesus, it's really hard to believe you don't have value anymore. It's really difficult because that truth in and of itself, it's objective, it exists in history outside of yourself, it's verifiable, shows and proves that to believe you're not valuable is irrational. It really is, because of what God had done. As a matter of fact, this simple principle has been one of the defining core values of Western civilization, and that is what has brought us our form of government today, because over time, it elevated the whole principle of individual sovereignty. And that is, this biblical New Testament stuff continued to be seeded in the lives of people, and no matter how much monarchs, kings, tyrants, dictators, emperors tried to suppress people and say that, well, we're different, we're special, we have the divine right of kings to rule over you because we have blood that's different than yours. The message got through that, well, actually, that's just not true. It's just not true. As a matter of fact, in the eyes of God, everybody has individual sovereignty. Everybody has value. And so that's why it's so fascinating to see how Jesus has influenced that over the last 2,000 years in Western civilization. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until our founding fathers in the United States of America brought to the forefront the whole notion of individual sovereignty. It had not existed anywhere in the world up until that point, where everybody to that point, even in feudal Europe, were considered subjects of the king. So you were owned by the king. But when America was formed, you were no longer a subject, you were a citizen. And that's interesting because when you read the New Testament, we talk about citizenship all the time when you come to know Christ. So what's happening today, though, is something you need to be aware of, and that is there is a movement within Western civilization and Western cultures that is seeking to eradicate the whole notion of individual sovereignty. The primary way in which they do this is through the critical theory, social theory. It's also updated to critical race theory. It also comes out in a lot of feminist ideology, third wave feminism, called patriarchy. And what this notion is that society is organized in groups, and there's always a very small group that oppresses all the other groups. And depending upon your group status, it determines how much you're being oppressed or held back. And this, of course, is a form of Marxist ideology. It's called cultural Marxism. And what happens in its application is it tries to define people not by their individual sovereignty, not by their individual liberty, not by their agency, meaning their capacity to take responsibility for their own life, make their own decisions, choose what they want to do, whether they want to make something of themselves or not, whether they want to be productive in culture or not. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has everything to do with what they deem ethnic and socio group you were born in, right? And you are not allowed to move out of that group, which I find just so interesting. An attempt to help women, feminists pigeonhole women and say, you'll never break out of this because this is your cultural identity. So I've always found that to be radically incongruent. If you are a woman who believed in the value of women, and if you believe that a woman could do anything that she can do and that you shouldn't be held back, then it would seem to me that the last ideology in the world you'd want to ever adopt is feminism, because it's counterproductive to that. Because it always says that because you're a part of this gender group, you'll always be oppressed. So I just don't really quite understand that. Maybe somebody will send me a note and try to explain it to me. But I think you're going to have a tough time because the incongruence there is just so clear. I mean, it's irrational, illogical, okay? The movement within Western civilization to get rid of Jesus is to use these ideologies to show that he wasn't who he said he was, or that his followers are a part of the problem and have caused all of the oppression of all of these groups. I was reading an article just recently, and notice what they said in this article, okay? The cultural left's ever-intensifying campaign to cancel every last vestige of Western civilization has been dealt a decisive blow by the forces of sanity, not just in suburban school boards or the Virginia governor's mansion, but in the secular heart of European Union. The European Commission rolled out a 32-page document in October titled, and this is back in 2021, I believe, or 2022, a document titled Guidelines on Inclusive Communication, which features the kind of inclusion that aims to exclude and entirely erase the Christmas holiday and Christianity in general. Not everyone, and this is a quote, not everyone celebrates the Christian holidays, and not all Christians celebrate them on the same date, said the document, which encouraged people to replace the word Christmas with holiday and Christmas time with holiday time. It also counseled speakers to avoid such divisive phrases as ladies and gentlemen, which furthers the gender binary. The EU leadership said these speech restrictions will help create a union of equality. So isn't that interesting? We're going to have to restrict your speech in order to create equality. But if people were equal, then their speech should be equal. Their thoughts should be equal. And so you should tolerate all the different thoughts. But in their attempt to be equal, they're treating people unequally. Does that seem irrational to you? Or maybe another way of saying it, that's just plain stupid. It's just plain stupid. And this is coming out of the EU, right? And what's amazing to me is that this is a reflection of the elites, the most highly educated in the European Union. He goes on to say this. The guidelines are published by an Italian journal, Il Giornale, on the first Monday of Advent, touching off massive popular backlash across the supranational governing body's 27 member states. They also offended the EU's most conspicuous Christian spokesman, Pope Francis, who likened the attempt to erase Christianity and Christian holidays to Nazi and communist totalitarian regimes of the recent past. The quote is, "In history, many, many dictatorships have tried to do so. Think of Napoleon. From there, think of the Nazi dictatorship and the communist one." Isn't it interesting that whenever you have a totalitarian state, the first thing they want to do is they want to eradicate Jesus. And the first thing they do is they eradicate the holidays and the seasonality of what his followers worship about him and celebrate about him. It's interesting to me. In order to be an effective totalitarian state, an effective dictator, you have to eliminate Christmas. That should be a sign for people, okay? Now, let's dig into a couple more things that are not overtly specific and ideological, but they kind of show you how society, particularly secular humanists, are attempting to eradicate Jesus from Christmas. Now, this is more of an abstract point that I'd like you to think about, but it's the popularization of cultural norms. So one of the things that cultural Marxists do is they try to elevate some things for the broadest appeal. And they try to say, well, this is what's most popular and people like the most. Case in point, Bing Crosby's Dreaming of a White Christmas is more popular than Buddy's Green song, Mary Did You Know? So Bing Crosby's I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas is very generic. It's very plain. It's like Dawkins' cultural Christian persona. But Buddy Green's song, Mary Did You Know, is a song specifically about, did you know that you were carrying the Son of God? So it makes specific, very specific references to the deity of Jesus Christ. One of the most popular things in Christmas right now is the Grinch, all right? People love the Grinch. As a matter of fact, one of the most popular things on the internet now, all the memes are going on, is instead of people dressing up as Santa Claus, they dress up as the Grinch to come in and steal Christmas presents and terrorize their kids. The kids are screaming and yelling. I'm thinking, well, those kids are never going to forget that Christmas. That's for sure. But the Grinch is now one of the most popular Christmas symbols. You add to that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. These things are more popular in moviedom and culture than the Nativity Story or The Chosen or any of these things. Now, is that overtly a bad thing? No, I'm not going to try to, run around like Chicken Little saying the sky is falling about everything. But I would like you to really consider something, and that is, why is it that our society, when it celebrates Christmas, only wants to celebrate those things that they believe have the broadest appeal? And the things that they believe have the broadest appeal are things that have nothing to do with Jesus. They only have something to do with the trappings or the ornaments of Christmas. So I think what's really interesting is what they're doing is they're trying to change the narrative. And what the narrative basically is, by getting rid of Jesus through all these pursuits culturally around Christmas, is what we're ultimately trying to do, is very symbolic, is get rid of absolutes. Let's get rid of the objective truth claim. Let's get rid of the notion that this all revolves around Jesus, who he was, who he claimed to be, that he died on the cross, and that he rose from the dead. This is all about a person named Jesus. But let's get rid of Jesus and let's celebrate and worship the trappings of the season. Let's even take his name, which Christ was not Jesus' name. His name was basically Jesus, the son of Joseph, right? But they called him Jesus the Christ, which is translated from the word in Greek, Messiah. So if we can get rid of Christmas, the Messiah, and just simply call it Happy Holidays, then guess what? We're diluting that. Which, by the way, this is just a pet peeve of mine. Saying Happy Holidays is just a misnomer, because the word holiday comes from a truncated word meaning holy days. So when you say Happy Holidays, you're saying happy sacred or happy holy days. So even in an attempt to distill it to something else, ultimately doesn't work. because I believe Jesus is reality. No matter how hard you try, you can't get rid of Jesus. Ain't going to happen. But what it does say is that this cultural progressivism is kind of like the Borg, right? It's kind of like you will be absorbed and you will think like us. We're going to have one mind. Today we call this the woke mind virus, that everybody has to think the same way and everybody has to have the same values, and we don't tolerate any discontent or alternative viewpoints because they're oppressive and hurtful. And so what we do is we take the least sane people in our society and we elevate their beliefs about themselves and then force everybody else to participate in their illusion. This is the Borg. Peace and unity they desire through enforcing uniformity of thought, of behavior, and of values. This is not progressive in any way, shape, or form. It is 100% regressive. A simple reading of history reveals this to be a fact. So, if we allow the erasure or the dilution or the removal of Jesus from Christmas, ultimately, we are going to lay the groundwork for ideologies that end up denigrating your value as a human being. This is where socialism, communism come from. This is where the critical race theory ideology came from. This is where cancel culture comes from. I can go on and on and on and on. These ideas of progressivism and socialism and communism all come from Marxist philosophy. And Marxist philosophy was ultimately to create a bureaucracy that denigrates your individual sovereignty. And the best way to do that is to get rid of Jesus. Karl Marx said that religion or belief in God is the opiate of the masses. We have to get them off of this drug if we want to implement what we want. This is why Lenin came along when he imposed, during the Bolshevik Revolution, communism, that he completely attempted to eradicate the church. The Russian Orthodox Church only survived by adopting a partnership with the communists, which never worked, almost killed it. This is why Adolf Hitler, this is historical fact, he came in and he took over the Lutheran Church in Germany. The only Lutheran pastor that stood against his infiltration and the Nazis' takeover of the Lutheran Church was a man by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was ultimately arrested and then executed for his trouble. When you go to China and you look at the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong outlawed Christianity. Even today, did you know that today it's illegal in China to be a Christian? You are not allowed to talk about Jesus. You're not allowed to share the gospel, and you can be arrested and you can be interrogated and you can be ejected or even imprisoned if you do so. Many, many years ago when my mom was working, she worked with an organization that recruited college kids that would fly to Hong Kong, and then they would get on the train with suitcases full of Bibles. This is before Chinese government took possession of Hong Kong. And these college students were like, well, we're sightseers. We just want to go up. We're tourists. And so they would take and smuggle in suitcases on the train filled with Bibles in Chinese. And this really ministered to the Chinese underground church there. There's stories of how when they would take Bibles out to little villages, that people in the village that were Christians would weep because they had never had a Bible in their language that they could read, and someone brought them one. You see, Mao Zedong, he didn't want that happening. And even today, the CCP doesn't want that happening. As a matter of fact, Xi Jinping has increased the persecution and oppression of the expression of Christianity. And he's tearing down churches and arresting people, throwing them in prison for the sole purpose of believing that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Today, in Niger and Nigeria, in the northern parts that kind of bump up against the southern Sahara Desert, the Fulani herdsmen are coming down and wiping out Christians. For over 200 years, Christians, first from Britain and then from America, went there and established schools and built churches and villages and water projects and infrastructure so that many of these villages were thriving and they were existing and their kids were getting educated. And now the Fulani herdsmen, they built hospitals, orphanages, and the Fulani herdsmen are coming down and they're kidnapping young girls and forcibly marrying them in Islam and converting them as young as 9 and 10 years old. They are burning down hospitals. They're burning down schools. They're burning down churches. It is unbelievable. And people in America, our media, don't know about it because our media is completely silent about it. Just recently, over there in, I believe it's called Tajikistan, there was a group of over 150,000 Armenian Christians. And they were in a valley producing food, kind of living on their own. They'd lived there for probably 1,000 years. And the Muslim government came in and enacted one of the greatest massacres and ethnic cleansing that you could ever imagine. And the progressive left in America did absolutely nothing about it. It was during the Obama administration, and it was absolutely one of the most horrific things you could ever imagine. And yet we did nothing as a country to stop this ethnic cleansing. And so I think it's really important to understand that the number one people group persecuted in the world today is Christmas. Christmas is a celebration of Jesus. It is not about a political system. It's not an economic system. Christianity is not a social system. At its core, it is a truth claim about Jesus and who he is and who we are as human beings and how our hearts need to be healed. That's what Christmas is all about. And the reality is objective truth. The truth claims of Jesus Christ himself are the things that lead to all the benefits in society. Solid and strong political theory, good social theory, economic practices that benefit the greatest amount of people. But in the end, none of these things are what Christianity is. They are simply fruit that grow on the tree of liberty that is planted in the soil of Jesus. So this Christmas, celebrate Jesus and don't let Jesus be removed from what you value, what you honor, because that's where true joy comes from. I just want to say Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope you have a great time. If you'd like to become a part of the Salty Crew and help the Salty Pastor Podcast continue to grow, you can go to our website. You can listen to as many of our past podcasts. You can even search by topic or passage of scripture if you like. And you can click on the like and subscribe button on our Salty Pastor YouTube channel. That helps it grow as well. Or you can become a regular donor. Just click on that donate button. We'd love to have you do that. So I just want to say Merry Christmas and God bless you. And I hope that this season is one of the best seasons of your life.